Since y'all ain't got any questions, I'm going to go into our lesson tonight. And tonight is about giving sacrificial service to God through your service and your work in the church, through the church, and for the church. And so that's what I want to look at, because so many people are at church and come to church, but they don't do nothing when they get here. They make no sacrifices, and it's just not about sacrifice of your money or your resources, but it's sacrifice of your time and your talent. And if you read the miracle of the 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent, it is about the money or the talents that they were given, but it's also about that they had to give their time and use their talent in order to get an increase. So it was about, when Jesus told that miracle, about the talents that the master gave, but it's also about their talent and their time. And what we don't do in our modern world, the way church is set up today, and you can blame a little bit of it on COVID, but we don't give enough of our time or our talent to God. And we don't even want to talk about money. But our time and talent has to be given to God if we're going to reap any of the benefits of receiving a heavenly reward. We got to give some of our service to God when we join the church, not just be a member, but work in the church and work for the church. And that is sacrificial service. It is a sacrifice that you have to give and you have to make. And I wanted to go to Mark chapter 8 and look at what Jesus says to his disciples. And in the context, it is Jesus predicting his death. He is getting close to finishing his earthly assignment. It starts in verse 31. Jesus began to talk and to teach about why he came and the purpose of his incarnation. And he's going to start talking about his death. And it is a deep conversation. But now you got to read what it starts saying in verse 31. Because in verse 31, there are some words I want you to remember before we get to verse 34. When Jesus gives the edict that you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. That's being sacrificial in service. And that is giving yourself over to God to be used. But this is what he says in verse 31, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to try to do my best to explain it. He says, and then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things. I want you to highlight the word suffer. Jesus says the Son of Man must suffer many things. Underline that word. And be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law. I want you to underline the word rejected. And then he says it must be killed. Underline the word killed. And Jesus is explaining this foreshadowing of his death and crucifixion. But those 3 words are important because as Christians, we don't want to do any of those. We don't want any of those to happen to us. We don't want to have to suffer. We don't want to have to be rejected. And we're not physically killed, but we are physically and spiritually persecuted. It's an equivalent to being persecuted, or are people trying to blacklist you or blackball you. And so these 3 things Jesus says is going to happen to him. Now, up until this point, Jesus' popularity among the people was pretty good. And it shifted around John chapter 5 or 6 which is pretty much one chapter in two, where Jesus tells them, "You're gonna have to drink my blood and eat my flesh." And it says, "Many who follow him no more." The crowd thinned out, but his disciples remained faithful to him. And so the people still followed Jesus, some after this, because of the miracles. The bread miracle, the bread and fish miracle, made him very popular. But after Jesus demanded more of the people after the bread and wine miracle, bread and fish miracles, many who follow him no more. But when he continued to do miracles, he still drew crowds. And when he taught, he still drew crowds. But the constant enemy of Jesus was the list that he listed in this verse. The elders, the priests, the teachers of the law remained Jesus' constant enemy. They hounded Jesus from the beginning of his earthly ministry at age 30, and they did not quit hounding him until his eventual death, which they were responsible for. And so Jesus is really speaking to his own situation, his own experience, and he is going to share with them how he must suffer, be rejected, and eventually be killed. None of these things would we willingly sign up to go through: suffering, rejection, or to be persecuted. And we wouldn't be necessarily killed in this moment or this season for our faith or for what we believe, but we will be persecuted by the church and by the world. We studied the book of Galatians, and we talked about how those who were Judaizers were inflicting persecution and bondage upon those who were uncircumcised, who had come to faith, Gentile Christians, and they had to suffer because they refused to give in to these Judaizers and conform to the law of Moses. And so I'm just trying to build a picture. And Peter spoke plainly about this, took Jesus aside and rebuked him. But Jesus turned and looked at his disciple and rebuked him, Peter, and said, "Get thee behind me, Satan, for you do not mind the things concerning God, but merely the things concerning humans or human concerns." And so Jesus is really painting a picture of Peter, that Peter has an earthly mind and he needs to have a spiritual or godly mind or God-like thinking, that Jesus was here to set up a heavenly kingdom, not an earthly kingdom. And so Jesus is really explaining to them. Now look, the three things you got to be able to endure if you're going to be a Christian today. You got to be willing to suffer. You got to be willing to be rejected, and you got to be willing to be persecuted. You got to be willing to go through all three of those: persecution, rejection, and suffering. I was listening to a sermon today, and I was listening to Dr. Emmanuel Scott talking about the blood of the saints. And he, in that sermon, talked about the blood of Jesus Christ in John 3:16, but he talked about it in 1 John 3:16. It's talking about the blood of the saints, about those who had to suffer for their faith and those who had to go the high road and had to do things that was hard to do, other than they did it because they understood what Jesus said. If any man desires to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. But that cost them something for you to be sacrificial. And Dr. Scott said that you had to shed some blood, not physically, but spiritually. You had to suffer, be rejected, and be persecuted, or do what was hard to do. That's really what his point was, that the blood sacrifice that we have to perform sometimes to be Christians is to do what's hard for a person to do. And he gave two or three good illustrations. And I really love the illustrations that he gave. He says that the blood of Joseph was not literally physical blood, but the blood of Joseph was that he treated his brothers better than they treated him. And when he could have took the low road, he took the high road. He did what no ordinary human being could do if they didn't have a relationship with God and didn't understand what God was doing in the big picture. Because he did go back to when they first mistreated him and sold him into slavery and lied to his father about his existence and told him he was killed. And now he has an opportunity to take vengeance upon his brothers, but he doesn't. He does something that's not normal for any human being to do outside of a relationship with God. And that was a demonstration of a Christian denying himself, which was his flesh probably wanted revenge. His pain would probably lead him to want revenge. The loneliness that he suffered being away from his father and his brothers and his mother would lead him to want revenge. The mistreatment of his brothers, the fact that he got an opportunity to exact vengeance, all of that. But Joseph did not take vengeance. He suffered at their hands, but refused to make them suffer because of what they done. And that was sacrificial. That was denying himself and taking up on the mistreatment of his brothers as his burden and not put his burden on them. And his burden would be the burden of, when I get a chance, I'm going to get them back. He gave that illustration that is sacrificial. That is doing something that is not normal to do and it's hard to do outside a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's a person who denies himself. But then that second illustration he gave was David in the treatment of Saul in that cave, where he had a chance to kill David. I mean, he had a chance to kill Saul. David had a chance to kill Saul, but he didn't. And he would have been right and justified to do it because Saul was chasing him, looking for him to kill him. But he denied himself. He denied what his flesh would have told him to do, what his comrades and fellow soldiers or those who was in David's army or entourage said, that's your chance, kill him. But David denied himself, took on the responsibility of the mistreatment and the anger of Saul. He took it upon himself, and where he could have enacted revenge, he showed compassion, only cut off a piece of his robe instead of his neck. He could have sought revenge, taken the high road, denying himself. It's really about denying yourself, denying every human impulse to do what it is that your base depraved nature tells you to do. That is important. And so that is a part of denying yourself, according to Dr. Emmanuel Scott. And so he says Christians have to get to the place where they do more than just merely exist and give in to every human impulse and give in to our depraved nature. Now, it's easy for you to say an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You do me wrong, I do you wrong. I'm going to get you back one day. That is not a Christian way to live. A Christian way to live, as we looked in the 6th chapter of Galatians, if any man be overtaken in fault, we who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. And so this is what he says in this particular verse. And then he called, then he called the crowd to himself along with his disciples, and he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself. That's hard to do. It's hard to deny yourself. The self-denial is the hardest thing for any person to do, human to do, because your base nature, your depraved nature, your instinctive nature is to take care of you. You're the most important person. You take care of number one above taking care of anybody else. You look out for number one. And Jesus is teaching, deny yourself. And he's talking in the context of giving yourself over to God for Christian service, for God to use you to advance the work of the kingdom. And what he does by giving this illustration, he already tells us what that involves. It involves suffering, rejection, and persecution. If you as a Christian cannot endure persecution, rejection, and suffering, you can't deny yourself, take up a cross, and follow Jesus. I mean, so many Christians now are so sensitive. They got thin skin. Anything upsets them. Anything provokes them. Anything enrages them. But he's teaching a simple principle here that a Christian has to condition themselves to be able to take some stuff, go through some stuff, and endure some stuff. And he's really teaching this, Dora, things are going to happen to you that are unpleasant, that literally make you want to quit, make you give up, make you throw in the towel, or make you not be the Christian that you ought to be. And I really don't have time to explain it to you the way I want to explain it to you, but one of the things that Christians and church members have to do today is that you have to learn how to deny yourself. Everything in you told you to stay at home tonight. Everything. You wanted to stay at home. But what did you do? You denied that impulse. You denied that desire. You denied that voice, and you got up and came anyway. That's an illustration of denying yourself. Denying yourself of the comfort of your own home, the convenience of your own home, and really staying at home to save money because of the high gas prices. And it's 6 o'clock, it's close to your eating time or your winding down time, and you got up and came anyway. That's a part of self-denial. You went against every instinct, every feeling, every emotion, and then every reasonable, logical reason to stay at home. You denied yourself. That's what it means. Everything in you tells you not to, but because you deny yourself and you don't listen to your impulse, your emotions, and your nature, you go against that and say, I'm going anyway. That's what you did. That's why you're here. But then he says this, take up your cross. This is where the suffering comes in. He already told you in the previous verses what it means to suffer. It means you're going to be rejected. In his case, it's going to be killed. In our case, we're going to be persecuted. Now, to suffer, Dr. Magnus Scott was saying the blood of the martyr or the blood of the Christian is that the Christian has to accept that he signed up to suffer. Now, we don't like suffering, not in the face of the prosperity gospel. It tells us nothing should ever be wrong with us and nothing bad should ever happen to us. And that if something wrong happens to us or something bad happens to us, we can just speak in the atmosphere. Or we can declare and decree, and that bad thing won't happen. And the things that bad do happen, we can just speak, and those things will disappear, dissipate. But you got to suffer if you're going to serve God. You're going to be in some unpleasant situation, unpleasant circumstances. And he really talks about there's some things that's going to happen to you just as a human. But then there's going to be things that happen to you as a Christian. Everything that happened to Job was because Job was God's servant. God particularly picked Job out and said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Job's suffering was primarily and exclusively because God chose him to suffer. It wasn't random. It wasn't the devil. It wasn't his friends or his foes or family. Job was suffering because God chose him to suffer. God chooses some suffering for us. You don't have to pick it up. You don't have to choose it. You don't have to invite it. God has determined you're the one to suffer in this season. That's just the way it is as a Christian, as a believer in the Lord and in the Lord Jesus Christ. You're going to suffer. Nobody really wants to sign up for that. Nobody wants to sign up. Nobody wants to believe that we serve a God that will pick us for suffering. pick us to go through things that cause us trouble, anxiety, cause us to cry, mourn, and to grieve because of our own personal situation. But God does that. Now, you don't hear people teaching that. All they teach is that God has chosen you to bless you, to favor you, to bring wealth, health, and prosperity to you. God chooses us sometimes to suffer. But nobody wants to discuss that. Nobody wants to teach that because nobody really believes that that happens. But you have to look in the scriptures to see if and how and when God does what he does in the life of an individual. He chose Job. Satan says, I just been up and down trying to seek or find somebody to mess with. And I ain't found nobody. And God said, I got a recommendation for you. His name is Job. Have you considered my servant Job? And the devil said, listen, I did, but you got a hedge of protection around it. And your favor is upon him. And he's under your divine protection. And God said, I tell you what, I'll lift that divine protection and I take down that fence. And Satan says, okay, it's on. And he went down there and messed with Job and couldn't get Job to break. Had to go back to God. And as if though the first round of suffering wasn't enough, Job lost all of his material possessions, his children, his wealth, and all the material things. God then gave the devil permission to go down and attack his health. Suffering that God allowed. God gave permission and his consent for Satan to bring suffering in the life of Job. He'll bring suffering in your life and mine. I'm just telling you, that's just the way it happens. Some suffering God allows. Then this idea of rejection. We don't want to be rejected. And rejected literally means we'll be rejected. Listen, I want you to read this text carefully. Jesus didn't say he was going to be rejected by the non-religious community. No, the non-religious people. But look at who he said was going to reject him. And be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. The very people that should have been accepting, embracing, and open to a new rabbi were the very people that rejected him. We don't like to suffer, but we don't like to be rejected. We have to, and we got a need to be liked by everybody. Ain't nobody supposed to dislike us. If we join a church, join a group, move into a community, start a new job, our perception is that everybody's going to like us, everybody's to accept us, and nobody is to see us as a foe, an enemy, or somebody adversarial. But you're going to have to be rejected. You're going to experience rejection if you decide to be a Christian. In other words, you're not going to be accepted everywhere you go. And sometimes what you say and what you believe going to get you in trouble. You know, I taught Sunday about being, I changed the subject of that sermon when I put it on Facebook, targeted by man, men used by God. If you become a gifted and anointed person to be used by God, you're going to become a target. People are going to reject you because God is with you, because God has anointed you, or God has given you a special level of giftedness on anointing, and people are going to reject it. Now, see, you're not being rejected because people don't like you. You're being rejected because something is different about you. Because in the text Sunday, I talked about when they looked at Stephen, his face shined or glowed like an angel. And that did something to them. Now, if they looked at him and they noticed that something about him was different, that he glowed and he shined like an angel, it should have been that they should have been more accepting to him. But it didn't cause them to be accepted. It made them even more furious. Because God gave him a level of giftedness to be an orator, to say what he said in such a way that they gashed their teeth And their hearts became even harder because he had a gift that they didn't have. And so they flat out rejected him. Some of what you and I are going through isn't because there is something about us that people don't like. It is something heavenly, spiritually, divine about us. Because you ain't the only person that's got what you got, look like you like, have what you have, and achieve the level of success that you have. You're not the only person like that. Me and you might be the same, but if God gives me a level of giftedness that is intimidating or makes people question their adequacy or their abilities, they become intimidated. And so they reject you. In other words, they're against you. Everything you do really ain't no good you can do. I don't care what you do. They're going to reject you because not because it's you, it's because they know you are gifted and anointed. You know, they didn't reject Jesus because Jesus didn't do good. Jesus done a lot of good. Healed the sick, raised the dead, fed 5,000, healed every kind of sickness that there was. He done a lot of good work, but that didn't matter. They just didn't like Jesus because he was God's light of the world. He was God's gift to the world, and God's presence was with him. You're going to be rejected even though you do good things. Even though God has given you a God-given ability to do great things. People will know that you're gifted. People will know that there's something different and extraordinary about you in some way. They're not going to like that part. Everybody else they accept, but you they reject. They can't stand you. They'll fight you. It ain't nothing you can do right and nothing you can say good. You, somebody else, you cut the yard. They say you think you run anything. Somebody else cut the yard. Boy, that's the greatest thing that ever happened. Both of y'all cut the yard. Got the same result, put forth the same effort, but they like this person and they don't like you. They reject you because something about you is different. It ain't that you cut the yard different, it's just that something about you is different. God has given you what Joseph had, the spirit of excellence. Of wherever he went, he accelerated and he was promoted. And so it is about taking up the cross. It is about, you got to accept being rejected. That's what it means to take up your cross. Not only to suffer, but it means you're going to be rejected, but then persecuted. Jesus says killed in this text, but it's about being persecuted. You're going to always be a target. People are going to be always fighting you in every area, every arena, in every circumstance. You're going to be the target of their frustration. You know what it means to be the target of people's frustration? That means they fight you wherever you go, wherever they are, you are. If you there to do anything good, they going to try to undermine, make it hard for you, persecute you, and eventually trying to take you out, blackball you, blacklist you. And so now I know about that. I know about that. I know what it means to be blacklisted and blackballed. I'm blackballed and blacklisted right now. And not because I'm any different. My life, past and present, is different than anybody else. But that's just what people do. They persecute you. They just fight you. They just don't like you. Nothing you can do to get them to like you. And so that's what it means to bear your cross. It means you're going to have to suffer. You're going to be rejected. And you're going to be persecuted. That's simply what it means. But whosoever wants to save his life must lose it. And whosoever loses his life for me and the gospel's sake shall save it. And then Jesus says this, for what good is it for a man to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? And really, this is a powerful verse. Now, I don't have time to unpack it. Jesus simply says this, out of all the things you do that are non-related to your relationship with God, your Christian service to God, is for nothing. Because only what you do for Christ will last. If you spend all of your effort not being sacrificial and giving yourself to Christian service in the church, through the church, and for the church, when you die, what's the profit? living in a big house, driving a big car, having a whole lot of money, having a lot of fame. What are people really going to say about you? What's the profit? What do you have at the end of your life? You know what? I've yet to go to a funeral, and I've been going to funerals for at least 50 years. For anybody to stand up to talk about the kind of car a person drove, the kind of house a person lived in, talk about how much money a person made. None of that really matters. They talk about the character and the virtue of that person, the service, the selfless service that they gave, the sacrificial service that they gave to serve somebody else. That's what people remember. They don't care what you were driving, what side of town you lived on, how good the job you had, how much money. They don't talk about none of that stuff. Because if you get all that stuff, what's the profit? Then let me give you this one. Matthew chapter 10, verse 38. This is such a powerful verse. Chapter 10, verse 38. Now, man, let me. Jesus says something simple right here. It's complicated, but it's simple. And this is Jesus when he sent out the 12. He sends out the 12 disciples, and he concludes and makes this declaration and this conclusion, and it's so powerful what he says, verse 38 of Matthew chapter 10. Look at what he says here. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Jesus says if you're not willing to suffer, be rejected, and suffer persecution, you're not worthy of me. You're not worthy of me. And whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life will find it. Jesus says if you want to find purpose and meaning in life, find something worth living for, give your life to me. And giving your life to me means you're going to suffer, you're going to be rejected, and you're going to be persecuted. But you'll find purpose and meaning. If you read from Genesis to Revelation, everybody that God used, you know how they got closer to God, how they wrote what they wrote, how they cemented their relationship with God? Through suffering, rejection, and persecution. Read it. Go to Genesis. You know how Adam got closer to God? Suffering, rejection, and persecution. Abraham, Noah, Moses, Jacob, Isaac, all of them. The verse in Timothy that says you can't reign with him unless you suffer for him. See, we don't teach that now. That the way you get close to God and God to get close to you, and for God to increase his power, purpose, and plan and anointing in your life is through suffering, rejection, and through persecution. That's how God develops any of us. That's how he developed anybody that he used in the Bible. They had to suffer because suffer determines fitness. Rejection determines commitment. And persecution determines the level of your faith. I mean, you got to be willing to go through something, to bear under something, to endure something. Listen, it's easy to walk in the light, but not in the darkness. It's hard to go through the valley and up the mountain. Everybody wants the easy way, but the way ain't always easy. That's where we are in our understanding of Christianity today. That it's easy. It ain't easy. You're going to suffer. You got to be rejected. You got to be persecuted. And Jesus says in Matthew 10:38, whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Taking up the cross, he literally means to suffer. You ain't worthy. If you ain't willing to be rejected, you ain't worthy. If you ain't willing to suffer some persecution, you ain't worthy. Ain't nobody signing up for that if they know that in advance. You know it now. Well, that's what it means to serve God in this church, in this community, in this world while you're living. If I took a poll right now, most of us can testify that we have experienced all three. As Christians, you've experienced suffering, you've experienced rejection, you've experienced persecution. Now, I can say this, and I bet you none of y'all raise your hand. You've experienced health, wealth, and prosperity. You might get health out of there, but it ain't all that good health because you wouldn't be taking all that medicine. You'd be running back and forth to the doctor. Prosperity, you've had a little bit of good things that happen in your life, but you ain't got that much prosperity because if you did, you wouldn't still be working. You'd be at home right now if you did hit all that prosperity. The things would just happen to you. And ain't but one of us probably wealthy in here, too. One got a shirt on says Florida, the other got a black shirt on. They experience well. The rest of us doing the best we can, holding on. But I guarantee you, all of us can say we've experienced suffering, rejection, and persecution. Ain't the truth what I'm saying? And by that standard, you're you're worthy of Christ. You're worthy of Christ. You've been enlisted and you've been considered certified and credentialed to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. Because you graduated when you accept. This is what this is about. It's about suffering. It's about rejection. It's about persecution. And he really taught. He laid into this, and I'm closing. He laid into this. See, by this standard, when one preacher that's preaching today would be preaching today, if suffering, persecution, and rejection, if it was the way it was in the scripture, if it was that way today, would not one preacher be preaching? Very few of us would sign up for this. Because the only thing we hear about is the wealth, health, and prosperity part. But if we really had to go through what the people in the Bible went through in order to be servants of God, very few preachers would sign up for it. Well, nobody signed up for that if they had to go through what Job went through. David went through, had to be on the run. He got anointed by the king in Jesse's house, and then went down to Saul's house, and Saul hated him, threw a spear, tried to kill him, and he had to be on the run, and then he had to run from his own son, Absalom. That's suffering. That's rejection. That's persecution. Would nobody sign up for it? But what we highlight and teach is the health, wealth, and prosperity. I'm going to say this, I get in trouble. Dr. Manuel Scott said this. He said he can't stand for no preacher to talk about how much money he makes. And he can't stand a preacher to talk about how many members he got. He can't stand to hear a preacher talk about how big his building is. If that's all you talking about, you ain't done no suffering. You ain't experienced no rejection. You probably ain't experienced no persecution. I ain't talking about all, but some. Some did in order to get to that point. To get the big salaries, the big churches, and the big membership. Because he said, don't nobody like no little nothing, especially Negro preachers. We got to have the big church, the big salaries, and the big congregation. We so in love with the big stuff. Because with the little stuff, we might have to suffer. We might have to deal with some valley days and some feel like that we being rejected and things are not going our way, and the church, the little church rejected our vision why we won't grow. But we don't like that. We want to go to the church, the big church that's got everything that we want, that we think we could be effective in ministry. But to go down to that little church, you got to work and fight and shed some blood. Because pastoring these little country churches is a blood sport. You're going to have to suffer some stuff down there, reject it and do some persecution. And so I'm just telling you, that's what he said. You're not worthy of me if you ain't willing to take up your cross. That's what people don't understand. I'm saying this and I'm closing. You got to be sacrificial. You can't say you're a Christian and you're never willing to sacrifice your time by coming to church, Bible study, using your talent for the church in some capacity. And we don't talk about money. You got to be, well, listen, this is what I want to say. In a small church like we got with a small membership, you as a member got to be sacrificial. You got to give more than you would normally give. You see how sparse and few folk we got? Somebody got to say, well, look, I see our membership is dwindling and declining. Might have to give a little more. That's what it means to be sacrificial. Nobody want to do that no more. But you got to do that sometime. You said, we ain't got but a few members, so I know I need to go to church tonight. You know, if everybody said that and did that, if everybody said, well, I know we ain't got but a few members and I'm going to church tonight. You know, if everybody done that one Sunday morning, one Wednesday night, you know the church would be packed. If everybody said, we ain't got family, I'm going tonight. I'm going today. I don't want to disappoint the Lord. I don't want to disappoint the pastor. And I want to support my church. I'm going to church. Because I know we got a small membership. That's sacrificial service. Man, I see we ain't got a lot of members, so I know I'm going to have to give a little extra this morning. The attendance is down. I need to give an extra couple of dollars. Folks don't think like that. Should. Ain't the truth what I'm saying? Should. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your word. Bless us now as we leave this place. Give us traveling grace in Jesus' name.